conservative, constitutional. It's the Andrew Cooperrider Show, keeping you informed on what's going on right here in Kentucky.
And welcome, everybody, to another amazing week right here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Past few weeks, we've had interview shows, of course. This week, however, fresh content, fresh show being made for you here. I took off for a few weeks. I still provide you, of course, with those interview episodes. We did a two-part series with Daniel Cameron, Nate Morris, and Andy Barr, worth going back and listening to. On that note, by the way, before I continue forward, big rumor circulating that J.D. Vance came in to Lexington a little bit earlier than he was publicly said to be here, and may have met with one of the candidates. Obviously, we know Nate Morris touts his friendship with J.D. Vance. I'd be shocked if they weren't meeting or talking about this election here, but, worth mentioning. So I did that. You can go back and listen to that, old episodes there, wherever you're listening to this at. If you're watching this on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, if you don't want to watch the video version, you can always listen to the Andrew Cooperrider Show podcast on all major podcasting platforms. If you're watching this or listening to this on TV or radio, you can also catch old episodes there. Just head over to theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's theandrewshow.com. I also had an interview I did with Ryan Dotson running for the 6th Congressional District. That interview, kind of interesting. I'd sent out a request to the candidates who had declared at that time. There's a 4th candidate that's entered the race. Seems pretty serious, that candidate does. But at the time where I sent out the request, it was to Alvarado, Deanna Fraser-Gordon, and, of course, Ryan Dotson. And Ryan Dotson was the only campaign that said they would go ahead and take part. So instead of doing a forum type thing like I did with the Senate candidates, I just sat down with Ryan Dotson as well. But as I mentioned, there was a 4th candidate that has hopped into that race there, worth mentioning, and that is Greg Plusinski. Hopefully I'm saying that right. Greg Plusinski. I guess he is, he's like a pharmaceutical guy. I guess he invented the delivery mechanisms for nasal spray is what I understand, what I heard. So he's supposedly self-funding. He's brought on some bigger names, of course, and he's certainly starting to look like a serious candidate. He did mention back on November 11th he was shooting for a video, so looks like he's ramping that up, taking a real shot at it. Interesting election. I've heard some rumors Deanna Fraser-Gordon might be dropping out of that election. I believe somebody's already declared for her state house seat. So a little awkward situation if she decides she wants to go ahead and jump out too as well. But Ryan Dotson's running strong. Alvarado's running strong. And it looks like Greg Plusinski, hopefully I'm saying that right. It's Plucinski, Plusinski. Greg. We'll just call him Greg. How about that? Until somebody tells me how to say his name, it's going to be Greg. So hopefully we'll hear more from Greg as we consider everything going on in that election there. But on today's show, we'll be digging into Lexington is facing a vote, the city council there, to purchase a new city hall building for a pretty eye-popping amount. Total amount over 35 years, this would cost us $209 million. And so we'll dig into this public-private partnership. The big story headline here is that the building that they're buying for 3 times what it's currently assessed at, 3 times what it was last purchased at in 2019. So we'll be digging into that as well. Also, we have a hearing that took place in the budget committee, the joint interim budget committee there in the state legislature. They had a hearing that got a little heated. Representative Petrie, who's normally pretty cool-headed, got a little up in arms there. Of course, that hearing was mainly stemming from that meals program. You may have seen me post about that, but we'll rehash out that. And then Fayette County Public Schools having issues, of course, more. And geez, we might have a few other things to talk about as well. So I have all that and more today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. If you're listening to this, make sure you comment, you like, you subscribe, you leave a 5-star review. If you're listening on the podcast platform, I haven't really made a call for that in a little bit. I have seen my recent numbers there, of course, picking up. I know There's 1,000, 1,500 or so of you listening to every episode. So I expect to get 100 more reviews. So if you haven't left a 5-star review yet, please do so on all podcasting platforms. But without further ado, let's dig down into it. So I posted it on Facebook, social media there on Wednesday. So feel free if you want to see what I'm referencing and see that post. You can share it if you like. But I talked about how Lexington is preparing for a vote this past Monday. They kind of pushed it off till December. So if you are a resident of Lexington and this upsets you, you can, of course, make your voice heard to your city council person. Tell them to vote no. But also, if you're not a resident of Lexington, why should you give 2 cares? Well, outside this being just a ridiculous story, of course, Lexington, Louisville, all cities, everybody pays taxes and money is fungible. So when they get funding in from the state, when they get money in from the federal government even, that money is used for these kinds of things. And so it's all kind of one big pot there, you could say. It's very fungible. So here's the deal. So Lexington's City Hall, they say that, look, it's in disrepair. Apparently it needs $30 million worth of repairs, they say. Is that true? Is that not? I don't know. I don't know where they cook up this number, $30 million worth of repairs. Like if a building, so we're talking downtown Lexington, don't get me wrong, I know buildings are expensive and whatnot down there, but if a building needs $30 million in repairs, are you just building a new building? Like, that seems like a lot of money. Also, it's worth mentioning that when you have that conversation about, you know, they have a building, should they go look at a new building or something like that? It's not like that asset, that building is going to go away. They're going to have to sell that building. And it's not like they sell the building and somebody just demolishes it. That's not normally what happens. Somebody will buy that building, somebody will rehab it, and then lease it out for a profit, which stands to reason that if their complaint isn't that it's too small, which they haven't complained about that, they haven't said that it's too small, well, then that would mean that the building then is just in disrepair. That's the issue here, not the size of the building. I haven't heard that argument. So somebody's going to come and buy that building, fix it up, and then lease it out and make money on it. So it would stand to reason, if somebody's going to be able to do that and at a profit, surely buying a new building wouldn't necessarily be the only answer here. But that is the direction that Fayette County government, LFUCG, Lexington Fayette Urban County government, because of course it's an urban county government, much like Jefferson County. That is the direction they're looking at going. And the building they're looking at is 200 West Vine Street. This deal overall, they're looking at spending $86.6 million, but they're going to finance it over time. So of course, with the interest payments and interest on the money and payments and everything else, you're looking at a total cost to the taxpayer over 35 years of around $209 million. $209 million. In order to get this building, they're going to, so what they're doing is they're going to the current owners, which is owned by the Lexington Opportunity Fund, which is part owned by Webb and Greer Properties. Interesting point here on Webb, and you know we'll get to that here in a second about Webb, because they sold another building for way over assessed value to Lexington, to the school district recently. That's firing up, of course, some of the eminent domain concerns going on in Lexington. But what's interesting about every time they seem to sell it to the city, they sell it for way more than it's assessed at by the PVA. And there's a lot of questions I have about how the PVA has come to an assessment of what they came to, because we end up with a private assessor. A company came in and assessed what the building's worth and said it would be $23.6 million is the fair market value of this building, that had a property assessed value of $8.5 million, which was recently increased in 2024 from $5 million. So it has been reassessed recently by the PVA, and they came up with $8.5 million. But there's some weird things going on with the records here, because the building was sold recently to Webb, to the Lexington Opportunity Fund, and it sold for more than $5 million in 2019. It sold for $7.4 million. Leaves a lot of questions. So we'll be digging into this deal overall. And then also digging into that budget hearing up in Frankfort when we get back here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. We'll see you back here in a few short minutes. And you're back here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Before the break, digging into this Lexington City Hall deal. So here's the deal overall. So it's a public-private partnership. So Lexington Opportunity Fund currently owns the building, and it's been assessed to be worth $23.6 million. Okay? And so what they're going to do is take this $23.6 million, then spend $63 million towards renovations and constructions. Now, the first problem with the price is that this building was last sold in 2019 for $7.4 million. Now, they cite that when they're looking at the value. They look at the value, then they look at improvements. They said there's improvements done. But what's weird is, and anybody who owns property knows this, is that, so the PVA will come out and assess your home. But what it will also, if your home sells or anything else for a price, that becomes a home's value until it gets reassessed. But the building last sold in 2019 for $7.4 million, but the taxing value, what the PVA set the value at though, was $5 million until 2024, where it went up to 8.5. Now, first off, I have no idea how that happens. How does the PVA set a value lower than what you bought it for? That doesn't happen to me. Does it happen to you when you purchase properties? When I bought my house, they weren't like, well, sure, last time it was assessed, it was $100,000 and you bought it for $200,000, but we really think you got screwed. So it's $150,000 is what we actually think it's worth. Has that ever happened to anybody? But that happened here. And what's weird, too, is this property is not the only Webb Associate property that this has happened on. We also had the property at Mason, Headley, and Versailles that the Fayette County purchased, which was valued at, I think, $2.5 million, and they bought it for $10 million. How's he getting it? Is anybody else out there, has anybody got their tax bill, looked at the value of their home, and been like, wow, that is 10 times less than this house is worth? I'm not hearing complaints. I'm hearing people say, look, my property values have gone up 20% year over year, 10% year over year. They've gone up so much that we've had these tax fights with taxing districts keeping the rate the same, but it ends up raising taxes 5, 6, 7% because year over year property assessed values have gone up 5, 6, 7%. And here we have this person, 2019, 7.4. Now it's worth 8.5. Was $5 million is what they're paying on for several years. On top of that, now they're saying, well, it's really worth 23.6. I'm just saying, unless there's been a lot of improvements made very recently, I don't see that. And then if there has been a lot of improvements made very recently, why does it need $63 million more and more improvements for a total project cost of $86.6 million? So what they're doing is they're buying this from the Opportunity Fund, $30 million down. And then the Opportunity Fund is going to, they're buying the building from them, then giving it back to them to provide the $30 million down payment, I guess, to the Opportunity Fund so they can turn around and get the rest of the $86.6 million for Fayette County, and then Fayette County will pay $3.5 million a year for 35 years. And then at the end of that, they can purchase the building for $1. That's how you get to the total cost of this being $209 million. Now, what's interesting, too, is when we look at standard municipal bonds. So a municipal bond right now, you're looking at about 4.6% for 30 years. So if we extend that, if we did that over 35 years, let's say it's even a little bit higher, but let's say you extend that out, and they just purchased the property and then and also too, if you're going to do the construction and the renovations yourself, you wouldn't, I'm assuming Webb or the Opportunity Fund there is making a little bit of a profit. So the cost would probably come down a little bit too. But even if the cost was still $86.6 million on a 35-year municipal bond, and they financed it with $30 million down at a 4.6% bond yield rate, they're still spending $200,000-$300,000 less per year on payments over the life of this entire thing. You'd be looking at $9 million less to do this with bonds instead of doing it through this public-private partnership. That's a pretty good return, too. If I'm not mistaken, that's about, what, a 15% return or so? That's pretty solid for real estate. That's not bad. That's not bad. So anyways, looking at that there, moving on though, talking about money, there's this interesting dust up that occurred earlier this month in the Interim Joint Committee on Budget. So how this works for those of you who are appropriations and revenue, those of you who are unaware, Interim Joint Committee. So during the session, you have these committees in both the House and Senate where they actually vote and they pass legislation. And there's mirrored committees in both. So there's a budget committee in the House and a budget committee in the Senate. And then when session's out, they come together and form this interim joint committee that meets once a month to basically prepare and do the work. And so that way, when they come into session, they're prepared, they've had hearings, they've been able to go ahead and figure out what they're going to pass, what they're going to get accomplished. And this year is a budget year. So obviously appropriations and revenue has a lot of work to be doing. And recently in the headlines, this was a few weeks ago, we had this meals program come about where they said the federal government brought back funds. So to be clear here, the federal government, so there was these COVID dollars out there. And what they said was that the federal government said they were pulling back funds just out of the blue, it seemed like, and that the senior meals program was going to have a $9 million shortfall. And then Beshear, from somewhere, pulled out from a Medicaid study. Those of you who listen to the show know I talked about this at the time. Just pulled like the $9 million was like, oh, we found it. We can fund it. Because if he couldn't fund it and he wanted to keep it going, he's going to have to call the legislature back into session, and well, he doesn't want to do that. And so the talk about how this happened, how do we get to an emergency point where suddenly we had an issue was quite a conversation. And so I want to play this first little back and forth so you kind of understand the setup here. So through the committee hearing, Hicks, the budget director from the governor's office, and Dr. Stack from Cabinet for Health and Family Services were before the committee, and they were talking about when they knew what they knew. And so they admit they knew in May 2025 that they were going to have a shortfall. However, in September 2025, they said, hey, keep going, you're fine, everything's good. They were indicating to the programs, the regional programs handling this, that everything's fine, keep enrolling people, keep going. And then like a month later, they're like, oh, shoot, we ran out. We're in an emergency funding situation. And so Petrie's sitting there. That's the House chair, Representative Petrie. He's sitting there saying, look, how did you not realize you're going to run out of money? Why did you signal this beforehand? Why do you not keep track of what's going on? So let's go ahead and take a listen here to what he had to say. And for context here too, the meals program over 2 years has grown 1,000% in 2 years. 1,000%. How did that happen? Well, let's listen here to what Hicks and Stack here had to say.
Can I share? There's two ways to look. Well, there's probably numerous ways to look at this, but let me, from a programmatic way, look at it. Because I get the concept of the problem, and we had a previous discussion, and I share the concern about when the tide goes out on one-time federal funding, what's left.
Right.
One of the challenges is when there's money and it's available for allowable purposes, there's the programmatic desire to support Kentuckians who are in need. So this was one of those allowable ways. This program continued, we showed that growth of over 1 million meals over just 5 or 6 years. I think had we not had that one-time federal funds, this program would have probably never grown this size, which I think is part of the point you're trying to make.
So there you go. They admit that they were using one-time federal funds to enroll people into a permanent program, creating a permanent situation. Now, they later go on to explain that what it was is they had a waiting list of people trying to get into the program, and when they had the funds, they went ahead and just cleared all those people on. And so they've always had a quote-unquote budget shortfall. They've always had more people wanting to use the program than funds they had to pay for the people who want to use the programs. However, instead of bringing them on, because they didn't have the money, it was just a waiting list. And then when the federal funds came through, they just cleared up their waiting list. They have no more waiting list. And so therefore, now we're in a position where we have all these people on this program that we don't have the funding for. And I think it's worth talking here for a second. One, this is the problem with just government planning in general. Whenever they get one-time funds, they will do permanent expansions into programs that they should have never done. You see this time and time again when they will get awarded temporary funds. And then they think, well, if I use it for the right thing, they'll never take the funding away. So I can just permanently expand government welfare programs with these temporary funds. I mean, Reagan said it best. I think Reagan said it. There's nothing more permanent than a temporary government plan, right? Like this clearly wasn't temporary. That's coming in. You don't have the money. But here's the thing, though, that is so confusing to me. And I don't want anybody to misconstrue this as me saying, like, look, of all the things government does, feeding the elderly, feeding the sick, feeding the poor, feeding the kids, is one of the least of my concerns as far as government money spending. There's a lot of other things we waste money on before we start looking at these programs, especially senior programs. I could make an argument that the meal programs for people who aren't as much in need or are willfully in need, I would call it, where they refuse to work, for younger individuals causes greater issues for us. Like they're on other government programs and we're enabling them to not go out and support themselves and everything else. But when we're talking about the elderly, it's not like, well, if we take away their welfare, they might enter the workforce again. Like we're talking about the elderly here. I get that. So I don't want to misconstrue that, but I do have a point I want to make about this program, but that's not it, because there's also, I want to play another video from this committee hearing that gets pretty heated here on this subject. So we'll have that when we come back here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. We'll see you in a few short minutes. We're back on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. For the break, we're digging into this interim joint committee on budget appropriations committee where they had Hicks, the budget director for the governor, and stack forward in front of the committee there, chaired by Petrie, Representative Petrie. And before the break, we were talking about how this food program used these one-time federal dollars to clear up the waiting list, and now the temporary federal dollars that were always temporary is no longer there, and there's a budget shortfall in the program. They're talking about how before they used to be on a waiting list, and before the break, I was making it clear, I'm not here to attack old people getting food. I mean, like I said, of all the things government does, it's probably the least wasteful thing we do. However, what is going to be the movement going forward here? 1,000% in 2 years. Now, I don't know of a story, and I could be super wrong, but I haven't heard of a story of old people dying by starving to death, by the unavailability of food, by the fact that the Meals on Wheels, they were on the waiting list for Meals on Wheels, and because they didn't get cleared for it, they starved to death in their home. Because if that story had happened, we would clearly want to deal with that. Whether it's through private charity getting involved or whether it's through the government getting involved or something. If there was a story like that out there that has happened prior to this 2,000%, prior to this massive growth, prior to this budget shortfall, they said they've always had more demand than they've had money, but before it was just on the waiting list. So back when they had waiting lists, I don't know of a single story where we heard about a elderly person dying due to starvation because Meals on Wheels didn't deliver to them. And if that wasn't happening before, maybe we don't need to keep funding it at this 2,000% level? Bite my head off for suggesting it in the first place. I get it. And I said, out of all the things government spends money on, this is probably the least wasteful. I get it. But I do want to point that out. It'd be wrong of me, I wouldn't be a true fiscal conservative if I didn't point out that, our safety net should be there to stop people from dying due to a lack of essentials, housing, food, water. It's really more convenient for me for my meals to be delivered than it is for me to go to the grocery store or ask my kids to take care of me, as we've always done historically. I think that's important because, one, the food programs, as we saw during the shutdown, can be unstable. And if you're relying on the government to feed you, well, you maybe shouldn't be. And second, it does call, like, we are a free country, or supposed to be. Freedom means that we can make our own decisions, and sometimes bad things happen because we make our own decisions. And I'm not saying that bad things an old person started that. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying, though, is that, you know, it should fall to the kids to take care of their parents. That's how it's always been historically. It shouldn't fall to the taxpayer. And maybe if somebody doesn't have kids or disability or something like that, then we have that conversation. But I think that is worth looking at. Don't bite my head off. As I said, out of all the things government does, that's probably not the worst. But that isn't the end of this meeting, because it gets pretty heated here. So normally cool, normally calm Petrie, he kind of loses it on Hicks when he gets a little uppity here. So essentially, to frame this in, Petrie's asking for things from them because they're the budget committee. They make their budget, right? So if they need more funding for something into the next budget year, they need to account for it in the budget committee. And one of the things that had been requested, because revenue is falling and things, and so there's might be some government cuts or reallocation of funds. There probably won't be an increase of spending, you'd think, but you know, they're looking at that saying, look, we don't have the same amount of federal funds we did. We don't have this, we don't have that. We might have to readjust some things. And so Beshear had requested all the cabinets to put in a reduction plan, a way to reduce spending, put that plan into the governor. So that way then the governor could put forward his budget plan. And Petrie asked for those reports from the secretary heads on the financial situation. What do they think they need funding wise, what they don't. And this is what occurred. Let's take a listen to this.
From CFG and reduction, I understand that each cabinet is supposed to be coming up as of early October, coming up with a plan for those reductions and how to address them on their own. Have you submitted that to the executive branch?
Yeah, that's all processed through OSPD.
So you have. Secretary Hicks, have all the cabinets done that?
Yes, we have draft plans from
they've all
cabinets.
Complied?
Yes, they have. All the cabinets have. Yes.
Okay. Can you get those same plans from each of the cabinets to us within 14 days also?
No, sir.
Okay. Why not?
Those are preliminary draft plans that we're going to take into consideration before the governor makes his recommendation. And when the governor makes his recommendation, I'll be happy to provide those details to you.
Yeah. So why can we not have a copy of a reduction plan that a cabinet secretary has submitted?
Because it's an input to a decision that the governor makes. It's not a decision that the cabinet makes.
Fine. I'm not looking for the governor's insight. I'm looking for the cabinet's insight and looking for their input. So, no.
The answer is no.
You understand what was that word that was used in the prior presentation? What was that? Do you remember it? Collaboration. This has been going on since 21, where we try to collaborate. Nope, wait for the budget address. Nope, wait. Nope, wait. This is not politics. This is policy. This is budget. This affects Kentuckians. It's not a presidential race. It's not any other race. It affects Kentuckians. I find it atrocious, abhorrent, that the executive branch can't share information about potential plans on how to deal with budgets that affect Kentuckians in unbelievable ways. Wait for the budget address. Wait for it. Wait for it. How about collaboration? Put us under an NDA, put us under a whatever you need, collaboration. We've had bombs laid in budget process that we've picked up on. We've had other issues. Look, we're going to put a budget out. You can do it collaboratively, or you can do it adversarially. And the second one is horrible for Kentuckians. I would really hope that you could share. And if it needed to be held confidential so we could just explore the issue without the public and the politics and the press and the Twitters and everything else getting involved, fine. But collaborate. Thank you very much.
Well, that is pretty fiery for Petrie, I will say that. Now, I disagree with him on one thing. No financial document should ever be withheld from the public. What he's asking for is saying, look, we're trying to put together this budget. We want to hear from the secretaries where they think cuts can happen so we can weigh that as we're making our budget. And the budget director told him, no, you're not getting that because it's for the governor to tell you what cuts he wants to make or not make where. Let me explain real quick how the budget system works in Kentucky. The legislature makes the budget. The governor can suggest something. He's welcome to. He's supposed to. But at the end of the day, they can take that suggestion and throw it in the trash. They don't need to ask him for his input. They don't even need to ask the secretaries for their inputs into their cabinet budgets. They can put whatever they want to in the budget. They're the ones who have power of the purse. And the reason why they want to see from the departments is because, and he points it out, Beshear's running for president. And what they don't want is to see a budget, suggested budget, the information on where they can make cuts and make differences to come from somebody who's trying to run for president. And so his budget, what he's going to spend money on, will be about what's a good headline. And it's not going to be about where we don't have that kind of money. That's what they're worried about. And they told him kick rocks. When we come back, let's see, Fayette County schools woes. We'll probably continue on the story too as well. We'll be back in a few short minutes. And you're back here for this final segment on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. For the break, digging into that joint interim committee hearing. Petrie got a little heated, a little hot there. One thing I want to bring up too is what Petrie needs to do at this point, and I've heard some rumblings that this may actually happen. Because if I have one goal for this legislative session, one legislative goal for me to get done in the legislature, for those of you who are unaware, I'm pretty active in trying to get things done in the legislature as a citizen, is that the state cut their budget at least like 3%, 4% year over year. Spend 4% less over the 2 years than what you spent the prior year. If we can get that done, that would be huge, because it hasn't happened. Since Republicans grabbed control of the budget, I think there was a decrease once under Bevin. But since Republicans grabbed control of the budget from the Democrats, spending has gone up like 30% adjusted for inflation. They're not spending less than the Democrats did when they ran Kentucky. So I'd like to see cuts. And I'd love to hear Petrie, that little theme song for him, cut it. Cut it. Those budgets way too high. You need to cut it. Cut it. I'd play for you the actual rap song, but all you get is my rendition of it. And please, hey, Petrie, if you need help, I'm here, buddy. I can make some suggestions for you. I mean, if you want to start Cabinet for Health and Family Services, I'd love to just sit down and let's go through and figure out all the places where they duplicate efforts. How many student health initiatives, mental health initiatives are there? Between Cabinet for Health and Family Services and then also through the schools, through the Board of Education. Is there cuts to be made there? Yeah, there is. Because I don't think the schools should really be in the mental health game. They're there to teach kids. Mental health should be probably in the Cabinet for Health and Family Services. I've talked about HIV/AIDS, the amount we're spending there on prevention. I mean, we're paying for drag shows for crying out loud on this stuff. That's real. I've talked about it before. Real contract issued to LGBT groups to put on drag shows to push HIV treatment and COVID shots and everything else. They call it infotainment. That's right. That's what they call it. So we'll give you a drag show, and then maybe at the end you'll take our pharmaceuticals. But anyways, I'd love to help. I'm here to help. Give me a call. I'll sit down for free. I'll spend hours on this. I will spend 12 hours a day, day after day, working on this with you, I promise. Because I want to see the cuts happen. And they are truly, and this is the problem with Beshear throughout. Just like he's able to find $9 million from a Medicaid study they never did. There is money hidden away places. There are places in this budget where you have money hidden away, you have finances hidden away that Beshear is not telling you about. And it's hard to detect them. And we need a full accounting of how much money everybody has and how much money they actually need and what they actually need it for. How many staff they have? How many employees do you have? How many do you need? So let's cut it. Cut it. But anyway, so Fayette County Public Schools here, for those of you who missed it, the tire fire continues. A pretty explosive board hearing last Monday. They've got 3-4 different issues cooking all at one time. So the first issue they have is obviously with their financial woes overall. And from that, you've got to branch off into a few other things. And so those financial woes overall, they got to make cuts and everything else. So right now, in that branch there, they've got their desire to, so there's a boys' school and a girls' school, boys and girls, like STEM school, I guess. And they want to cut that and combine them. Okay, so they want to take the girls and boys schools and combine them into one STEM school, I guess, to save money. Now, of course, they're building a new girls STEM school, so I guess they figured out that building, like you're building a building there now, so are you just going to throw the boys in there? But they just moved the boys STEM school. So the question is, like, and they are going forward with that property. I mean, they filed eminent domain because they forgot to make sure buses can get in and out. So they need to steal other people's property now to build a bus lane. Regardless. So you have that issue, but then you have this other issue stemming out that they have from that budget woes that goes into these audits. And so the auditor is right now doing an audit of Fayette County Public Schools. That's happening, regardless if they want it to or not. That's happening. But the way it works normally is that the entity that they're auditing, so the auditor would audit Fayette County Public Schools, but then Fayette County Public Schools has to pay the cost for that audit. That's how it always works. Now, the auditor tries to do things to cut it down, but one thing Allison Ball was trying to do for them was to have the state taxpayer pay for the audit because Fayette County Public Schools is already short so much money. She's like, well, I don't want to, being nice, I guess, making everybody else in the state pay for it. She's saying, I don't want to burden you with this cost of this audit, several $1 million, or how much it'll cost. So I'll put in a request that the taxpayer at large within the state cover the cost. And which led the Fayette County Public Schools to say, well, we'll go ahead and we'll get our own audit too. We'll do a double audit. And the auditor Ball's like, look, that's not only is that wasteful because I'm already doing an audit, but I can't request the state taxpayer cover the cost of my audit if you're out here getting your own audit at the same time. You've got audit money for days, apparently. I can't put in that request if you do this. And so they were set to vote on this Weaver and Tidwell. They put out, I guess, supposedly an RFP or something like that. And Weaver and Tidwell was the company they decided to go with. But of course, that's some issues because Weaver and Tidwell, Texas-based firm, but it was a part of the audit in Lancaster Independent School District in Texas, which is where Demetrius Liggins, the superintendent of Fayette County Schools, his husband, Dr. Elijah Granger, was the superintendent of that school. When the audit took place, that was the auditing firm. That audit, not that audit, but that situation led to Lancaster Independent coming under state control because of their financial troubles, and I believe the FBI was even brought in to investigate. I believe that's what I saw. Some things indicated to me that that's what happened. And so, is there only one school auditing firm in the country? How does, I understand in Texas, you go with a Texas firm, Texas, Weaver and Tidwell, but how is it that this same Texas firm that happened to audit Liggins' husband's school district that ended up having a lot of issues is the same auditor for Fayette County schools? Leads to some questions certainly. But, I guess if there's only one auditing firm in the game, maybe I should get into school auditing. I don't know what the requirements are. You probably have to be a CPA and stuff. But, apparently there's only one. You got Weaver and Tidwell. That's the name of the game. That's it. That's the only people doing it. So big market opening, apparently. So you had that issue going into their budget thing. So you had the combining of the schools, and then you have the auditor issues that deal with their financial woes. Then you have, because that's not enough, they have a union problem going on. Okay, so in Kentucky right now, there's 2 teachers unions, 120 strong or 120 united or whatever. That is a union, a part of the AFL-CIO, I believe. And then you have the KEA, Kentucky Educator Association, I believe is what it's called, which is the state branch of the NEA. So nationally, you have these 2 unions, the AFL and the NEA, and the NEA is the one with the bouncy woman. What's her name? Always yelling about something on TV, always super politically involved. I forget what her name is. Doesn't matter. But anyways, you've got the NEA and you have 120, which is a part of AFL. And what's interesting, or AFT, sorry, it's American Federation of Teachers Union, AFT. So you have AFT, which is 120, and you have KEA, which is part of NEA. Here's what's interesting. Tyler Murphy, the board chair of Fayette County Public Schools, is on the national board for the NEA. So he's on one of the union's boards, which conflict of interest, one might say. So they're talking about having collective bargaining, allowing unions to come in, and there's a fight over which union it should be. And that's on top of everything else going on. That is just mind-blowing. That's also an issue. So you have that problem. Now, you have this other issue going on within the board itself where the school board doesn't really like each other. So they had a rules proposal. And one of the rules proposed by one of the other board members was that basically the board members could vote to dissent, but they weren't allowed to talk to the press. Any comments they made and disagreements they made had to take place within the meeting itself. And when it came to the press, they couldn't afterwards go to the press and say anything. Instead, they had to use the approved talking points. Clearly a First Amendment violation, like quite clearly a First Amendment violation. And then also they wanted them to not be able to make any comments of support, negativity, motions, eye rolls, or anything else when people are giving public comment. So somebody stands up to give public comment and they didn't want you to be able to react to that public comment at all with approval, disapproval, any kind of motion or body language. So a lot of issues going on, and it really just keeps getting worse for Fayette County. You'd hope at some point something's got to give, but who knows? Well, that's what we have time for today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Thank you all so much for joining me. We'll see you back here next week.